I adjusted the pearl necklace against my throat for the third time, watching my reflection in the hotel's powder room mirror. The woman staring back at me looked polished enough. Silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, lilac dress that had cost more than my monthly grocery budget, sensible heels that wouldn't betray my nervousness on marble floors. But beneath the careful facade, I felt the familiar hollowness that had settled in my chest months ago. When Claire first announced her engagement to Ethan and made it clear that my role in the festivities would be minimal. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Mom, you understand, right? She'd said over lunch at that trendy bistro where the portions were microscopic and the prices astronomical. Ethan's family is very traditional. We want to keep things simple, elegant. You know how you can be sometimes. How I could be. As if my existence itself was somehow embarrassing, something to be managed rather than celebrated. The powder room door opened, and Claire swept in wearing the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether you belonged somewhere. Her engagement dress, a flowing cream silk that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothing in the past 2 years, rustled as she checked her reflection. "Oh good, you're ready," she said, without looking at me directly. "The Ashfords just arrived, and Ethan is introducing everyone. Try to, just blend in tonight, okay?" Blend in. The phrase settled in my stomach like spoiled milk. We walked into the hotel's grand ballroom together, though Claire immediately drifted toward a cluster of 20-somethings holding champagne flutes like they were born to it. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light, making the whole scene look like something from a magazine spread about lives I'd never lived. I found myself gravitating toward the edge of the room, near the tall windows that overlooked the city. From here, I could observe without participating, which seemed to be my designated role anyway. The conversations around me blurred into a familiar symphony of accomplishments, vacation destinations, and investment strategies, the kind of casual wealth that my daughter's new social circle wore like well-tailored clothing. "Excuse me, aren't you Dr. Savannah Coleman?" The voice came from behind me, warm and slightly uncertain. I turned to find a woman about my own age, maybe a few years younger, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a modest black dress that suggested she, like me, might not quite belong in this particular constellation of prosperity. Yes, I am," I replied, surprised to hear my professional title after so many months of being simply Claire's mother, or, more often, nothing at all. "I thought so." Her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "You taught my daughter Sarah Mitchell? She graduated from State about 15 years ago. She still talks about your Victorian literature course. Said you changed the way she thought about reading, about life." The warmth in her voice was startling. I'd grown so accustomed to the careful politeness of Claire's friends, the way they looked just past me when introduced, that this woman's enthusiasm felt foreign. "Sarah Mitchell," I repeated, searching my memory. "Red hair? Wrote that beautiful paper on Jane Eyre and feminist rebellion? That's her. She's a librarian now, has 2 kids of her own. Always says she owes her love of books to you." For a moment, the ballroom faded. I remembered Sarah, bright, eager, one of those students who made teaching feel like a calling rather than a job. I'd retired from the university 3 years ago after 42 years of shaping young minds, and sometimes it felt like those decades had simply evaporated, leaving no trace. "Savannah!" Claire's voice cut through my reverie, sharp with something that might have been panic. She materialized beside us with Ethan in tow, tall, handsome in that bland way that suggested good breeding and better investments, wearing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "There you are," Claire continued, her tone carefully modulated for public consumption. "Ethan, I'd like you to meet she's been like family for so long. She's basically our nanny who never left." She laughed, that bright, brittle sound she'd perfected in college. "She doesn't have much else going on these days, so she helps out around the house." The words hit me like cold water. Our nanny who never left. I felt my face flush, then drain of color entirely. Beside me, Sarah's mother, I'd never even gotten her name, went very still. Ethan extended his hand with that practiced charm of his. "Lovely to meet you, Savannah. Claire's told me so much about how you help out. as if the woman who had raised Claire single-handedly after her father's death, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her private school and college tuition, who had sacrificed her own dreams and retirement savings to ensure her daughter never wanted for anything, as if that woman was simply domestic help who had overstayed her welcome. "Funny," Sarah's mother said quietly, her voice cutting through the polite chatter around us like a blade. She was my daughter's professor at State University, one of the most respected faculty members in the English department, from what I heard. The silence that followed was profound. I watched Claire's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been horror. Ethan's practiced smile flickered like a candle in wind. Around us, conversations continued, but our little bubble had gone crystalline with tension. "Professor?" Ethan repeated, his voice climbing slightly. "You were a professor?" I found my voice, though it felt rusty from disuse. "For 42 years, I taught Victorian and modern literature, published 3 books, dozens of articles, won the university's Teaching Excellence Award 4 times. Each word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been slowly chipped away over the past few years." Sarah's mother was nodding encouragingly, but Claire looked as if she might be sick. "Mom," Claire began, but I held up my hand. "Dr. Coleman," I corrected gently, "or Savannah, but not our nanny who never left." The woman beside me, I really needed to learn her name, smiled with what looked like fierce approval. "Sarah always said you were brilliant. She kept all her papers from your classes, you know. Still references them in her work." More people were beginning to notice our conversation now. I could see heads turning, the subtle shift in attention that occurs when something interesting, or potentially scandalous, happens at a social gathering. Claire's eyes darted around the room, calculating. "Mom, can we talk privately for a moment?" "Actually," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "I think I'm exactly where I need to be." I turned back to Sarah's mother, extending my hand properly. "I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name." "Janet?" she said warmly, taking my hand in both of hers. "Janet Mitchell, and I cannot tell you how much my daughter owes to your teaching. You inspired her to pursue graduate work in library science, to specialize in literacy programs for underprivileged children. She says you taught her that literature isn't just about books, it's about understanding the human condition." Behind me, I heard Claire whisper something urgent to Ethan, but I kept my attention on Janet. Here was someone who saw me not as an inconvenience or a burden, but as the person I had spent 4 decades becoming. "I'd love to hear more about Sarah's work," I said. "Literacy programs sound wonderful." "Oh, she'd be thrilled to tell you about them. She's actually here tonight, somewhere in this crowd. She came with me as my +1. Would you like me to find her?" Before I could answer, Claire's hand landed on my arm with just enough pressure to communicate desperation. "Mom, please. We really need to talk." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised, loved, sacrificed everything for, and saw a stranger. When had the bright, curious child who used to curl up beside me while I graded papers become this person who introduced her own mother as hired help? "In a moment, dear," I said, the endearment carrying just enough frost to make Claire blink. "I'm having a conversation." Janet was watching this exchange with interest, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. "You know, Savannah, may I call you Savannah? I'd love to introduce you to some other parents of your former students. Sarah mentioned there's quite a network of them here in the city. They meet monthly for book discussions, use your old syllabi as starting points." "They do?" "Oh, yes. Sarah organized it. She calls it the Coleman Circle." Janet's smile was radiant. "She'd be mortified to know I told you that. They wanted to invite you but weren't sure how to approach a professor emeritus." The Coleman Circle. Students I had taught, continuing to engage with literature, with ideas I had shared with them years ago. The hollowness in my chest began to fill with something warm and unfamiliar, something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten its name. Pride. Behind me, Claire made a small, frustrated sound. "Mom." "Dr. Coleman," I corrected again, not turning around. "And yes, Janet, I'd very much like to meet other parents. And perhaps we could discuss your book club's current reading list?" As Janet launched into an enthusiastic description of their latest selection, one of the novels I'd taught for decades, I felt something shift inside me. The careful composure I'd maintained for months, the way I'd diminished myself to fit into the small space Claire had designated for me, began to crack. I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to matter. The conversation around me continued, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over the evening's revelations like stones in my palm. Our nanny, who never left, doesn't have much else going on. How had I allowed myself to become so small? The ride home in Claire's BMW was arctic. She gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, her jaw set in that particular way that reminded me of her teenage years, when she'd been caught in some transgression and was calculating her defense. "You embarrassed me tonight," she said finally, not taking her eyes off the road. I sat in the passenger seat, still wearing the lilac dress that had felt like armor earlier, but now seemed like a costume I was ready to shed. The city lights blurred past the window, and I found myself thinking of Janet Mitchell's words. The Coleman Circle. Students who still discussed my teachings, who found value in ideas I'd shared decades ago. "I embarrassed you?" I kept my voice level, though something cold and sharp was crystallizing in my chest. By being recognized as the professor I was for 42 years? By making a scene? By correcting me in front of Ethan and his friends? Do you have any idea how that looked? "How did it look, Claire?" She pulled into the driveway of the house where I'd lived for the past 18 months, the house I'd helped purchase with the sale of my own home, my retirement funds, my life savings. The garage door opened with a mechanical growl, and she parked beside Ethan's silver Mercedes. "It looked like you were trying to make me seem ungrateful," she said, finally turning to face me, "like I was being cruel to you or something." The garage went quiet except for the tick of the cooling engine. I studied my daughter's face in the dim light, the face I'd kissed through skinned knees and broken hearts, the face I'd watched beam with pride at her college graduation, her law school acceptance, her wedding to Thomas before that fell apart 3 years later. "Were you being cruel, Claire?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "That's not... You're twisting this around. You know what I meant when I introduced you that way. It was affectionate. Affectionate. Yes, like you're part of the family. I am your family. I'm your mother." She looked away first, gathering her purse with sharp, agitated movements. "You're being dramatic. Let's just go inside." The house was dark except for the automatic lights that flickered on as we entered through the mudroom. It was a beautiful house. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, granite countertops, hardwood floors throughout. I'd admired it in the real estate photos, had felt genuinely happy when Claire and Ethan decided to buy it together before their wedding. I had helped with the down payment when the house was purchased. Later, they refinanced and added both names to the deed. What I hadn't expected was how quickly I'd become invisible within its walls. "I'm going to bed," Claire announced, already heading toward the stairs. "We can talk about this tomorrow when you've had time to think." When I'd had time to think. As if I were the one being unreasonable. I stood in the kitchen after she left, surrounded by the remnants of pre-party preparation. Champagne flutes sat in the sink, lipstick prints on the rims like pink exclamation points. The granite island was scattered with jewelry and makeup Claire had tried and discarded before settling on her final look. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Dr. Coleman, this is Sarah Mitchell. My mom gave me your number. Hope that's okay. I heard you were at Claire's party tonight. Would love to catch up over coffee if you're interested. I have so much to tell you about the literacy program." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Sarah Mitchell, the red-haired girl who'd written so passionately about Jane Eyre's rebellion against her circumstances, who'd argued in class that literature's power lay in its ability to show us we weren't alone in our struggles. I typed back, "Sarah, how wonderful to hear from you. I'd love that. Are you free tomorrow?" The response came quickly. "Absolutely. There's a cafe called Meridian Books on 5th Street. Do you know it? 10 a.m. Meridian Books." I'd driven past it dozens of times but never gone in, too caught up in the careful routine of Claire's household to explore the city on my own. "Perfect. I'll see you there." I climbed the stairs to my room, the smallest bedroom, the one that had been designated as the guest room, though I'd been living here for over a year. The walls were painted a bland beige, decorated with generic hotel-style art that Ethan had chosen. My books, the ones I'd kept when I sold my house, were stacked in boxes in the closet because Claire thought they made the room look cluttered. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at myself in the dresser mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, diminished. When had I started agreeing to be so small? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. Gradually, then all at once. It had started when Thomas left Claire, when she'd seemed so lost and fragile. I'd sold my house to help her buy this one, moved in to provide support during the divorce proceedings. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But Claire had gotten back on her feet, had met Ethan, had rebuilt her life. And somewhere in that process, I'd become a fixture rather than a person. The woman who picked up dry cleaning and kept the house tidy while they worked. The woman who made herself scarce when they entertained. The woman who could be introduced as our nanny who never left because her real identity had been so thoroughly erased. I pulled out my phone and started typing a text to Claire, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. What was there to say that wouldn't sound accusatory or needy? Instead, I found myself Googling Dr. Savannah Coleman State University. The results made my breath catch. Page after page of academic articles, teaching awards, student testimonials on Rate My Professor sites. A faculty appreciation page from my retirement ceremony that I'd never seen before, filled with comments from colleagues and former students. Dr. Coleman changed my life. Her passion for literature was infectious. Best professor I ever had. Still use her teaching methods in my own classroom. A brilliant scholar and an even better teacher. The English department won't be the same without her. I scrolled through dozens of similar comments, feeling like I was reading about a stranger. When had I stopped being this person? When had I started believing that my worth was measured by my usefulness in Claire's kitchen? A soft knock at my door interrupted my browsing. "Mom?" Claire's voice, uncertain now. "Are you awake? Come in." She entered wearing pajamas, and the expression she'd worn as a child when she'd broken something valuable and hoped confession might minimize the consequences. She sat on the edge of my bed, tucking her feet under her. "I've been thinking about tonight," she said. "About what happened. And maybe I could have introduced you differently." The words came out reluctantly, like she was pulling them from somewhere deep and uncomfortable. "It's just, Ethan's world is so different from ours. His family has money, connections. They judge people by things like social status. I didn't want them to think what?" She picked at the bedspread, avoiding my eyes. "That I came from nothing. That my mother was just a college professor who had to sell her house to help me. The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. Just a college professor. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is." I felt something hardening inside me, like ice forming over moving water. "You're ashamed of me." "I'm not ashamed. I'm protective. Of both of us." Ethan's ex-fiancée was from this incredibly wealthy family, and when they broke up, his mother made it clear that the next woman he brought home better be suitable, established, from the right kind of family, the kind that doesn't need financial help, that doesn't depend on their children for housing. There it was, finally spoken aloud. I was an embarrassment, a liability, a reminder that Claire's life hadn't always been cushioned by Ethan's family money. I see. I closed my laptop, the testimonials from my students disappearing into darkness. And what happens after you're married? Will I become more suitable then, or less? Claire's silence was answer enough. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. We'll figure something out. Maybe you could get your own place. Something small and cozy. Ethan and I could help with the deposit, make sure you're comfortable." "With what money?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "I sold my house to help you buy this one. I used my retirement savings to cover your legal fees during the divorce. What exactly would I use for a deposit?" She flushed. "I thought there might be some left. There isn't." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. That I'd given her everything, believing it was temporary. That she'd allowed me to give everything, perhaps knowing it wasn't. That we'd both participated in my gradual erasure, and now we were staring at the results. "We'll figure something out," she repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. After she left, I sat in the darkness for a long time. The house around me felt different now, not like a temporary refuge, but like a trap I'd helped construct. Through the walls, I could hear the low murmur of Claire and Ethan talking, their voices urgent but indistinct. I thought about Sarah Mitchell's text, about the coffee date tomorrow, about people who still remembered Dr. Savannah Coleman as someone worth knowing. Then I thought about Janet's words, the Coleman Circle. They meet monthly for book discussions, use your old syllabi as starting points, a network of people who valued my mind, my contributions, my legacy, people who had built something lasting from seeds I'd planted years ago, people who saw me as more than our nanny who never left. I picked up my phone and scrolled back through the Google results, reading every testimonial, every article, every reminder of who I had been before I allowed myself to become Claire's convenient fiction. The woman in those testimonials wouldn't have accepted being introduced as domestic help. She wouldn't have smiled politely while being diminished in front of strangers. She certainly wouldn't have funded her daughter's lifestyle with her own financial security and then been ashamed of as a burden. That woman had backbone, had dignity, had boundaries. Tomorrow, I decided, I was going to start remembering how to be her again. Meridian Books turned out to be exactly the kind of place I'd forgotten existed. Narrow aisles packed floor to ceiling with books, the smell of coffee and old paper, mismatched furniture that invited lingering. I arrived 10 minutes early and spent the time browsing the literature section, running my fingers along spines like greeting old friends. Dr. Coleman? I turned to find a woman in her late 30s with auburn hair and laugh lines around intelligent green eyes. She was prettier than I remembered, more confident, but the eager smile was unchanged. Sarah. I felt my own smile spreading, genuine and unfamiliar after months of careful social expressions. Look at you, all grown up and changing the world. She laughed, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and enthusiasm. Hardly changing the world, but I'm trying. Come on, I got us a table by the window. The cafe occupied the back corner of the bookstore, a cozy space with 6 small tables and a counter displaying pastries that looked homemade. Sarah had claimed a table with 2 mismatched chairs and a view of the street, where autumn leaves were beginning their slow surrender to winter. Mom told me about last night, Sarah said after we'd ordered. Coffee for me, tea for her, and a chocolate croissant we agreed to split. How you were introduced, I mean. I hope you don't mind that she shared. I don't mind. The words surprised me with their honesty. Actually, I'm glad she did. It made me realize some things about myself that I'd been avoiding. Sarah's expression grew serious. Can I ask you something? And please, feel free to tell me it's none of my business. I nodded. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between us like morning mist. No one had asked me that in, God, how long? Years, maybe. People asked if I was comfortable, if I needed anything, if I was managing okay. But happiness? I don't think I've thought about happiness in a long time, I said finally. I've been focused on being useful, being grateful, not being a burden. That's not what I asked. The directness of it, so like the student she'd been, the one who challenged every assumption in class, made me smile despite the weight of the question. No, I said. I'm not happy. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I was afraid of that. When Mom described last night, the way you looked when your daughter introduced you, she said you seemed to shrink into yourself. Our drinks arrived, providing a momentary reprieve. I watched Sarah stir honey into her tea with the same careful attention she'd once given to her essays, and wondered what it would be like to have her focus, her sense of purpose. Tell me about the literacy program, I said, deflecting. Your mother mentioned you work with underprivileged children? Sarah's face lit up. It started because of you, actually. Remember that paper I wrote about Jane Eyre? About how literature can show us we're not alone in our struggles? I nodded. It had been a brilliant paper, one of the best undergraduate essays I'd ever received. Well, I kept thinking about that idea after graduation, about kids who grow up feeling isolated, different, like they don't matter. I started volunteering at the Children's Library, then developed this program where we use classic literature, but we make it accessible, relevant. We talk about how these old stories connect to their lives. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. Look at this. This is Carlos. He's 12, been in foster care most of his life. When we started reading Great Expectations, he said, Miss Sarah, this Pip kid sounds just like me. Nobody thinks he's worth nothing either. The photo showed a thin boy with serious dark eyes, holding a worn paperback like it contained secrets. "We have 43 kids in the program now," Sarah continued. "And here's the amazing part. They're not just reading the books, they're discussing them, writing about them, connecting with these characters across centuries. They're finding their voices." I studied the photos. Children of various ages, all holding books, all looking engaged, alive, important. "This is remarkable, Sarah. You've created something extraordinary." "We've created something extraordinary," she corrected. "The foundation is all your teaching. Those discussions we had about literature as empowerment, about how stories can help us understand our own worth. That's the core of everything we do." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Which brings me to why I really wanted to see you today. We need help. The program is growing faster than we can manage, and we need someone with real academic credentials, someone who understands both the literature and the pedagogy." I felt something flutter in my chest. Excitement, possibility, fear. "What kind of help?" "Curriculum development primarily. Maybe some direct teaching if you're interested. It would be part-time, probably 20 hours a week to start. The pay isn't great. Nonprofits never have enough money. But it's meaningful work. Work that matters. Work that matters. When was the last time I'd done work that mattered?" "Sarah, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I'm the right person anymore. It's been 3 years since I retired, and I've been out of practice." "Have you?" She pulled a folder from her bag, extracting several pages covered in neat handwriting. "Mom said you'd probably say something like that, so I brought proof that you're wrong." She spread the papers across the table. They were lesson plans, discussion questions, reading lists, all in my handwriting, all bearing the careful thought that had characterized my teaching career. "I don't understand," I said, though looking at them, I was beginning to. "These are from the Coleman Circle meetings. The book club Mom mentioned. Every month, one of the parents shares notes from your old classes, and we use them as discussion guides. But you've been improving them." "Improving them?" "Mrs. Patterson, do you remember her daughter Lisa? She brings her notes from your modern British literature course, but she said you've been making suggestions, additions, helping her think through the themes in new ways. Same with Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Rodriguez." I stared at the papers, recognizing my handwriting, but not remembering when I'd written these particular notes. Then it came back to me. Casual conversations at the grocery store, in the park, brief exchanges with parents of former students. They'd mentioned their book club, asked innocent questions about interpretation or context, and I'd found myself elaborating, expanding, teaching without realizing it. "You've been consulting for us without knowing it," Sarah said gently. "These parents have been learning from you for months, then bringing that knowledge back to their group. You've been shaping how 23 people read and understand literature, and you didn't even know you were doing it." The weight of it settled over me slowly. While I'd been diminishing myself in Claire's house, hiding my intelligence, pretending my decades of knowledge didn't matter, I'd still been teaching, still been making a difference. "The question is," Sarah continued, "would you like to do it intentionally, with a purpose, for people who would value what you have to offer?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Where are you? Ethan wants to discuss some things about the wedding plans. We need you here." The contrast was stark. Sarah offering me meaningful work with people who valued my mind, Claire summoning me home to discuss wedding plans that apparently required my presence, but not my input. "Can I think about it?" I asked, though something in my chest was already answering yes, desperately, yes. "Of course. But Savannah, can I call you Savannah? Can I say something that might be out of line?" I nodded. "You taught me that literature shows us we don't have to accept the roles other people assign us, that we can write our own stories, even when the world tries to tell us we're not the main character in our own lives." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "From what Mom told me about last night, it sounds like you might have forgotten that lesson yourself." The truth of it hit me like cold water. I had forgotten. Somewhere in the process of caring for Claire, supporting her, sacrificing for her, I'd allowed myself to become a supporting character in my own life. "The offer stands," Sarah said, gathering her papers. "But even if you decide the job isn't right, I hope you'll remember who you are. Dr. Savannah Coleman, the professor who taught 3 generations of students that their voices matter. Your voice matters too. After she left, I sat alone with my cooling coffee and the weight of possibility. Through the bookstore window, I watched people hurrying past with their own purposes, their own destinations, their own stories to write. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Claire. "Mom, where are you? This is important." I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Having coffee with a former student. I'll be home later." Her response came immediately. "We're waiting for you. The wedding planner is here." I turned off my phone. For the first time in months, I browsed the bookstore with no sense of urgency, no guilt about keeping anyone waiting. I selected 3 books, 2 novels by authors I'd always meant to read, and a collection of essays about finding purpose in the second half of life. At the register, the young clerk looked at my selections with approval. "Great choices," she said. "Especially this one." She held up the essay collection. "My grandmother read it last year after my grandfather died. Said it helped her remember she was still herself, not just his widow. Not just his widow. Not just Claire's mother. Not just our nanny who never left. Just herself." The drive home took longer than usual because I chose side streets instead of the highway, wanting to see the neighborhoods I'd been living near but not really observing. I passed a community garden where elderly volunteers were preparing beds for winter, a small theater advertising a production of Our Town, a farmer's market packing up for the day, a whole world of engagement and purpose that I'd been driving past for 18 months, focused only on the narrow orbit of Claire's needs. When I finally pulled into the driveway, Ethan's Mercedes was gone, but there was an unfamiliar silver Lexus parked where he usually left his car. Through the living room window, I could see Claire pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her gestures sharp with agitation. I sat in my car for a moment, watching her performance through the glass. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah back. Tonight, I would listen to whatever Claire needed to say about wedding plans and her important discussions. But I wouldn't apologize for making them wait. I wouldn't diminish myself to make room for their expectations. Dr. Savannah Coleman, the woman who had taught students to claim their own narratives, was slowly remembering how to write her own story. Claire was waiting in the foyer when I walked in, her arms crossed and her expression somewhere between irritation and something that looked like panic. The silver Lexus outside belonged to a woman I didn't recognize, tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of posture that suggested she was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Mom, finally," Claire said, her voice tight. "This is Vivian Ashford, Ethan's mother. She's been waiting to meet you." Vivian Ashford turned toward me with a smile that managed to be both gracious and calculating. She was probably my age, but where I'd allowed myself to fade into comfortable invisibility, she had clearly declared war on time and won several decisive battles. Her silver hair was styled in a way that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her cream-colored suit looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood the power of perfect fit. "Savannah," she said, extending a manicured hand. "How lovely to finally meet you. Ethan has told me so much about how helpful you've been to Claire." Helpful. The word landed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Mrs. Ashford," I replied, accepting her handshake and noting the way her eyes assessed everything from my shoes to my jewelry to the slight wrinkles in my blouse. "How nice to meet you. Please call me Vivian. We're going to be family after all." Her smile never wavered, but something in her tone suggested that my place in this family would be carefully circumscribed. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood and thought it might be nice to have a little chat before the wedding festivities really begin." Claire gestured toward the living room. "Would you like some tea? Coffee? Mom, could you—" "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I'd love some tea myself. Why don't I put on a pot for all of us?" It was a small thing, but I saw Vivian's eyebrows lift slightly at my failure to immediately scurry toward the kitchen like summoned help. We settled in the living room, Vivian in the wingback chair that commanded the best view of the space, Claire perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, and me in what had become my usual spot, the chair closest to the kitchen, so I could hear if anything needed tending. "What a lovely home," Vivian said, her gaze taking inventory of every detail. "So cozy. Very lived in." Another precisely placed word. Lived in. as opposed to the kind of showcase homes that graced the pages of architectural magazines. "We like it," Claire said quickly. "It suits our needs perfectly." "I'm sure it does." Vivian's attention turned to me. "And Savannah, how are you finding the transition? It must be quite an adjustment, moving in with young people after having your own space." The question seemed innocent enough, but I could feel the probe beneath it. How long was I planning to stay? Was I a permanent fixture or a temporary inconvenience? "It's been an interesting experience," I said carefully, "though I'm starting to think it might be time for some changes." Claire's head snapped toward me, her eyes widening. "Changes?" Before I could elaborate, the kettle whistled. I excused myself to prepare the tea, grateful for the momentary reprieve. Through the kitchen doorway, I could hear Claire and Vivian's voices, low and urgent. "Didn't realize she was planning," Claire was saying. "These situations can be delicate." Vivian's response. "Financial considerations. Proper arrangements." I took my time with the tea service, using the good china that Claire had received as a wedding gift from her first marriage, but rarely used. The delicate cups and saucers felt substantial in my hands, reminders of a life where such things had mattered, where I'd hosted faculty gatherings and dinner parties with confidence and grace. When I returned to the living room carrying the silver tray, another remnant from my former life, both women looked slightly guilty, like children caught plotting. "This is beautiful," Vivian said, admiring the tea service. "Royal Albert, isn't it? Such classic pieces." "Do they belong to you, Savannah?" "They do," I said, pouring tea with the practiced ease of someone who had once entertained regularly. "They were a wedding gift from my late husband's mother. She had exquisite taste." "Had?" Vivian's interest sharpened. "She passed away about 15 years ago. James, my husband, died 8 years after that." I handed her a cup, noting how her expression shifted as she processed this information. A widow, not a divorcee. Someone who had been married to a man whose mother could afford Royal Albert china. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, and for the first time her condolences sounded genuine. "How long were you married?" 22 years. He was a fellow professor, philosophy. We met at a faculty mixer when I was 28, and still naive enough to believe that academia would be a romantic adventure. I caught Claire staring at me and realized she'd never heard me talk about her father this way, with humor and perspective rather than the careful reverence I'd always used when she asked about him as a child. "A professor," Vivian repeated. "How interesting. What was your field?" "English literature, Victorian and modern. I taught at State University for 42 years before retiring." The silence that followed was different from the uncomfortable quiet after Claire's introduction the night before. This was the silence of reassessment, of a woman like Vivian Ashford recalculating the social dynamics she thought she understood. 42 years, she said slowly. "That's quite a career. You must have been very young when you started." 26, fresh out of graduate school with a PhD, and enough idealism to believe I could change the world one student at a time. I sipped my tea, watching her over the rim of my cup. "I like to think I succeeded with a few of them." "I'm sure you did." Vivian's tone had shifted, become more thoughtful. "You know, my late husband always said that the mark of true success was the impact you had on others, not the salary you commanded." Claire looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The conversation had veered completely away from whatever script she'd imagined, and she was clearly struggling to regain control. "Mom's being modest," she said with forced brightness. "She's always been very intellectual, very focused on her books and her teaching. Very intellectual." Said like it was a polite way of describing an unfortunate medical condition. "Intellectual pursuits are admirable," Vivian said, but her attention remained fixed on me. "Tell me, Savannah, what are your plans now that you're retired? Are you writing? Consulting? I imagine someone with your background has plenty of options." It was a lifeline, offered with surprising grace. A chance to reinvent myself in this conversation, to step back into my own narrative. "Actually, I've been offered a position developing curriculum for a literacy program," I said, the words feeling stronger each time I spoke them. "Working with underprivileged children, helping them connect with literature in meaningful ways." "How wonderful!" Vivian's enthusiasm seemed genuine. "There's something so satisfying about work that makes a real difference, isn't there? Much more fulfilling than simply keeping busy." Simply keeping busy. Another surgical strike, this one aimed at the way Claire had been using me. The woman who offered me the position was one of my former students, I continued. She's built this remarkable program based on principles we discussed in class 20 years ago. It's gratifying to see ideas take root and grow. I imagine it is. Vivian set down her teacup with a decisive click. You know, Savannah, I chair the board of the Ashford Foundation. We focus primarily on educational initiatives, particularly literacy programs. I'd love to hear more about this work you're considering. Claire's face had gone pale. Mom hasn't actually accepted the position yet, haven't I? I turned to look at my daughter, noting the desperation in her eyes. I suppose I should call Sarah tomorrow and make it official. The room went very quiet. Through the window, I could see that the afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking, marking the moments of this strange, suspended conversation. Sarah? Vivian prompted gently. Sarah Mitchell. She runs the program. Brilliant young woman. She's taken the theoretical framework we developed in my classes and turned it into something practical and transformative. Mitchell. Vivian frowned thoughtfully. Janet Mitchell's daughter? The librarian? You know Janet? We serve on the hospital auxiliary together. Lovely woman, very dedicated. She's mentioned her daughter's work, speaks of it with tremendous pride. Vivian's smile was warm now, genuine. Small world, isn't it? Claire looked like she might be sick. The careful narrative she'd constructed of her mother as a dependent, as someone who didn't have much going on, was crumbling in real time. This is all very sudden, Claire said weakly. Mom, you haven't really thought this through. The practical considerations, where you'd live, how you'd manage. I'm sure Savannah is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs, Vivian said crisply. She's clearly been managing quite well for decades. The implied criticism hung in the air like smoke. I caught Vivian's eye and saw something there that surprised me. Approval, perhaps even a hint of conspiracy. Speaking of practical considerations, I said, my voice steadier than I'd heard it in months. I should probably start looking into housing options. If I'm going to be working in the city, it would make sense to live closer to the program. Mom? Claire's voice cracked slightly. What kind of housing are you thinking? Vivian asked, with the air of someone genuinely interested in solving a problem. Something small but comfortable. I don't need much space. Just enough for my books and a place to work on curriculum development. I paused, letting the weight of decision settle around me. I suppose I should look into what I can afford. The financial reality hung between us, unspoken but understood. I'd given everything to help Claire, and now I was financially dependent on her charity. It should have been humiliating, but somehow, in this moment, it felt like power. Because Vivian Ashford had just learned that her future daughter-in-law had reduced a respected academic to the status of live-in help, and she clearly didn't approve. Well, Vivian said, standing with fluid grace, this has been absolutely fascinating. Savannah, I do hope you'll consider letting the Ashford Foundation learn more about Sarah's program. We're always looking for worthy causes to support. She gathered her purse, then turned to Claire with a smile that was all sharp edges. Darling, you must be so proud of your mother. Such an accomplished woman, and still finding new ways to make a difference in the world. After she left, Claire and I sat in silence for several long minutes. The tea had gone cold, but neither of us moved to clear it away. You planned this, Claire said finally. Planned what? This whole performance. Making me look bad in front of Ethan's mother. I considered the accusation, then shook my head. No, Claire, I didn't plan anything. I just stopped pretending to be smaller than I am. 3 days after Vivian's visit, I stood in the bedroom that had never really been mine, packing the life I'd accumulated over 71 years into cardboard boxes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was moving out of a house I'd helped purchase, leaving behind furniture I'd helped select, because I'd finally remembered that I was more than the sum of my usefulness to my daughter. The job offer from Sarah had been formalized that morning, 25 hours a week, developing and implementing curriculum for the literacy program. The salary was modest but sufficient, especially when combined with my pension. More importantly, it came with something I'd forgotten I needed: purpose. Claire appeared in the doorway, watching me fold sweaters with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make the most of limited space. "You're really doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Where will you go?" I gestured toward the stack of rental listings on my dresser. "There's a nice one-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from the community center where Sarah's program is based. It has a sunroom that would make a perfect office." "Mom, you can't afford—" "Actually, I can." I placed a stack of books in the box marked Study, noting how Claire flinched at the thud they made. "It turns out that when you stop subsidizing other people's lifestyle choices, your pension goes quite a bit further." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. Claire had always been clever enough to understand subtext. "Is that what you think I've been doing? Using you?" I stopped packing and looked at her directly. "I think you've been doing what seemed natural to you. Taking what was offered without questioning whether the offer was sustainable or fair. That's not—" She started to protest, then seemed to run out of words. Instead, she picked up one of my books, a first edition of Virginia Woolf that had been a gift from James 25 years ago. I never meant for things to become so what? Complicated. Complicated. I took the book from her hands and wrapped it carefully in tissue paper. "That's an interesting way to describe convincing your mother to sell her home and move in as unpaid domestic help." "You weren't unpaid domestic help. You were family. Family that could be introduced as our nanny who never left, without warning or apology." Claire sank onto the edge of my bed, suddenly looking older than her 34 years. I panicked, okay? Vivian was there, and Ethan's ex-fiancé came from this incredibly sophisticated family, and I wanted to fit in, by erasing me, by not making you a complication. She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the child she'd been, the one who'd hidden broken dishes rather than face disappointment. "Do you have any idea what it's like, constantly being measured against someone else? Ethan's mother has opinions about everything: where we shop, how we decorate, which charities we support. I felt like one wrong move, and she'd decide I wasn't good enough for her son. So you decided I wasn't good enough instead." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Claire's face crumpled, and for a moment I felt the familiar urge to comfort her, to soften my words, to sacrifice my truth for her emotional stability. Instead, I continued packing. "Mom, please, I know I messed up, but we can fix this. You don't have to leave. We'll figure out a better arrangement, maybe get you a little apartment nearby, somewhere you can have your own space but still be close. Close enough to babysit when you have children, to help with household management when your social calendar gets too busy, to be available when you need me but invisible when you don't." She didn't answer, which was answer enough. My phone buzzed with a text. "Vivian Ashford. Savannah. I've spoken with the foundation board about Sarah's program. We'd like to schedule a presentation. Are you available Thursday at 2? I showed Claire the message, watching her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been panic. "She wants to fund Sarah's program," I explained. "Apparently, Janet Mitchell speaks very highly of it at their auxiliary meetings, and Vivian thinks it aligns with the Foundation's educational mission." That's good, right?" "It's very good. It means the program can expand, help more children, maybe offer competitive salaries to attract top-quality staff." I paused, letting the implications settle. "It also means I'll be working with Vivian fairly closely. Funny how these things work out." Claire's face had gone pale. She understood, finally, what she'd lost when she chose to diminish me. Not just my presence in her house, but my connections, my reputation, my potential value to her social aspirations. "Mom, about the engagement party. What about it? I want to apologize. Publicly. At the wedding maybe, or—" "No." The firmness of my response seemed to surprise us both. "No," I repeated. "You don't get to apologize your way out of this, Claire. You don't get to make a grand gesture that costs you nothing and erases months of dismissing me as irrelevant. Then what do you want? How do I fix this?" I taped the box shut with more force than necessary. "You don't fix it. You live with it. You learn from it. And maybe, someday, you become the kind of person who wouldn't treat anyone the way you've treated me." The doorbell rang, interrupting what might have become an even more painful conversation. Through the window, I could see a small moving truck and two young men in work clothes consulting a clipboard. "That's my ride," I said, shouldering my purse. They'll handle the boxes. My new keys are on the kitchen counter if you want to forward any mail. Claire followed me downstairs, her movements jerky with suppressed emotion. Mom, please, don't leave like this, not angry. I stopped at the front door, my hand on the knob. I'm not angry, Claire. Angry would imply that I expected better from you. I'm disappointed, which is different, and I'm relieved, which is something else entirely. Relieved? To remember who I am. To stop pretending that love means making yourself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I opened the door, letting in the crisp autumn air. To realize that being alone is better than being diminished. Ethan chose that moment to arrive home from work, his BMW pulling into the driveway behind the moving truck. He emerged looking confused and slightly annoyed, his expensive suit wrinkled from a long day of whatever it was he did in his glass office downtown. What's going on? He asked, taking in the scene, the movers, the boxes, my purse and coat. Savannah is moving out, Claire said, her voice carefully controlled. She's taken a job in the city. A job? Ethan looked genuinely surprised. But I thought, aren't you retired? I was. Now I'm not. I turned to address them both, these two people who had shared my home for over a year without ever really seeing me. I'll be developing curriculum for a literacy program. Very rewarding work, the kind that makes a difference. Ethan glanced between Claire and me, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Well, that's congratulations, I guess. Where will you be living? Downtown. A lovely little apartment with a view of the park. I didn't mention that the view was partial and the apartment was in a building that had seen better decades. It was mine, chosen by me, paid for by me, and that made it perfect. The movers had finished loading my boxes and were waiting by their truck. Time to go. Claire, I said, turning back to my daughter one last time. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. I hope Ethan makes you happy. And I hope you learn to value yourself enough that you don't need to diminish other people to feel worthy. I walked toward the truck without looking back, though I could feel their eyes following me. The late afternoon sun slanted across the suburban street where I'd lived for 18 months, casting long shadows between the perfectly manicured houses. Dr. Coleman? One of the movers, a young man with kind eyes and calloused hands, held the truck's passenger door open for me. Ready to go? Very ready. The apartment was small but bright, with tall windows and hardwood floors that spoke of better days. The movers set my boxes in the living room and left me standing in the center of my new space, surrounded by the physical remains of my old life and the vast possibility of my new one. I opened the first box and found my books, the academic texts that had shaped my thinking, the novels that had sustained my soul, the poetry collections that had reminded me language could be beautiful. I shelved them one by one, creating order from chaos, building the foundation of my reclaimed life. My phone rang. Sarah's number. Savannah? I just heard from Mrs. Ashford about the foundation meeting. This is incredible. Do you know what kind of funding we're talking about? Enough to make a real difference, I imagine. More than that. Enough to expand the program to 3 more communities. Enough to hire additional staff, maybe even start a teacher training component. Her excitement was infectious, pulling me out of the melancholy that had settled around me like dust. Savannah, this could change everything. Good, I said, looking around my small apartment with its view of the park and its silence that was mine alone. I'm ready for everything to change. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window as the city lights began to flicker on. Somewhere across town, Claire and Ethan were probably having dinner, discussing their wedding plans, their future together, the inconvenience of my departure. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I chose to do, answerable to no one but myself. The nanny who never left had finally come home. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.